Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the National Transit Database, or NTD, webinar on sampling for passenger miles traveled and unlinked passenger trips. Thank you all for taking the time to join us today for this presentation. As a quick disclaimer, the contents of this presentation do not have the force and effects of law and are not meant to bind the public in any way. This presentation is intended only to provide clarity to the public regarding existing requirements under the law or agency policies. Grantees and subgrantees should refer to FTA statutes and regulations for applicable National Transit Database requirements. As Lori mentioned, my name is Melissa Conti, and I'm the Deputy Project Manager for the NTD Operations team. And I'm joined here today by Matt Bonzak, our Quality Assurance Lead, who has over 13 years of NTD experience. From the FTA side, we have our FTA program contact, Chelsea Champlin, who is the NTD Program Manager at FTA's Office of Budget and Policy. On this slide, we have some of our key reference documents that can help you understand NTD requirements at large and also NTD sampling method. So the first is our NTD policy manual, which covers all of our reporting modules and guidance related to reporting annually to the NTD. Then we have our link to our NTD sampling manual, which is the manual that outlines the NTD sampling method and how to use it, which we'll be covering in depth today if you do choose to use that. All right, so next, to accompany the NTD sampling manual, we have the NTD sampling templates. So these templates are posted online on our website to help agencies develop their sampling plan. We have one template that has data in it to help illustrate the process of using the template. And then there's one posted without data so that you can use it yourself to put together your agency's sampling plans. Matt's going to be covering these templates in detail today and demonstrate how to use this. The goal of this webinar is to help you understand passenger miles traveled, or PMT, and unlinked passenger trips, UPT, the reporting requirements for both of those, and also to review the NTD sampling method for estimating PMT and UPT. This webinar is designed for full reporters. Other reporter types do not report PMT to the database. Here is just an outline of the webinar today. So I'm going to be handling the first half where we'll cover key definitions and requirements, and then I will pass it off to Matt for the second half of the webinar to go over the NTD sampling method in detail. So we're going to cover these key concepts and definitions to help you understand the rest of this webinar and give some context to those NTD data requirements. We'll then cover which reporters need to sample and the requirements on when you need to sample, so at what timeline you have for sampling. And then we'll go ahead and cover the different options for sampling methods and cover how you would report your sampling methods on the D10 form, which is in your annual NTD report package. Matt will then walk us through the NTD sampling method in detail, including the options you have when you're using this method, how to create a sampling plan, how to collect data for your sample, and then how to use that data to then estimate your PMT. Like Lori said, we will have some time to review questions throughout the presentation in the Q&A pod and then also at the end. But sampling can be very agency specific. You might have some really in-depth questions that we want to make sure get answered. So there may be some cases, and especially with this topic, maybe a lot of cases where we would ask you to set up a meeting with your NTD analyst or send them an email, and we can help work on those questions with you one-on-one. So we will make sure that the question gets answered. We might just want to take some more time to review your agency's specific questions, your services, and anything you have related to sampling, whether it is the NTD sampling method or other methods you may have. All right, so first we're going to jump into those key definitions and requirements for PMT and UPT. So we're going to start with unlinked passenger trips. Unlinked passenger trips is one of the two important terms to understand before we move forward in this webinar. And unlinked passenger trips, or UPT, what we'll refer to it as moving forward, is the count of boardings on public transportation vehicles throughout your agency's fiscal year. Passengers are counted each time they board vehicles, no matter how many vehicles they use to travel from their origin to their destination. If a transit vehicle changes routes while passengers are on board, they should not be recounted. This is referred to as interlining. And then also, as to note for UPT, any employees or contractors on board for transit agency business, such as ride checking, which we'll talk about today, should not be considered passengers and not included in your total UPT count. All agencies reporting service data to the NTD are required to report UPT for their public transit modes. Next, we have passenger miles traveled, or PMT, which we'll refer to it as moving forward. And this is the sum of the distances that each passenger traveled during your fiscal year. So just to give a very brief example, just to illustrate passenger miles traveled, if we have 4 passengers on board your vehicles and they all board at stop A and ride to stop B, which is the distance of 2 miles, and then alight at stop B, we would record 8 total passenger miles for that trip. So we are looking for the distances of each passenger added together for each stop. And that is why we'll talk about sampling today, because as you may understand, this can be a little difficult to capture 100% count of PMT. It is important to note, especially to move to the next slide, only full reporters report PMT to the NTD. So if you are a reduced reporter, a rural reporter, or a tribal reporter, you do not report PMT data to the NTD. This is only for full reporters. All right, so who needs to sample? Most agencies collect a 100% count of UPT using things such as registering fare boxes. But PMT, like I mentioned, is going to be harder to capture since you need to know when a passenger boarded the vehicle, but also when they alight or exit the vehicle. So most bus and rail services don't collect PMT during normal operations like they may for UPT. Demand response modes usually do collect PMT since every trip is recorded in typically a scheduling software. So agencies can get the demand response passenger miles traveled from that software since they know the origin and the destination of that rider. There are a couple of edge cases like ferry boats that only serve 2 stops or smaller rail services like inclined plane that only serve 2 stops that you can calculate PMT by multiplying your UPT by the length of that particular route. An increasing number of agencies also get their PMT from automatic passenger counters, or APCs. But in the case of most bus and rail services, most agencies do still need to sample in order to estimate their PMT. What we mean by sampling is that you collect PMT on a small number of trips, and then you extrapolate that out to your entire service. So this can get you a good estimate of PMT if you follow sound statistical procedures, which is what we're here to learn about today. All right, so I mentioned that most agencies have a 100% count of UPT, but not all in fact do. Some agencies also sample to collect UPT as well. So UPT data reported to the NTD needs to be collected every year. So if you are sampling for UPT, you do need to sample every year for UPT. While you're sampling for your UPT, if that's something you do every year, you also need to sample for PMT, but FTA only requires annual PMT sampling for the very largest services. So these are going to be our services that are directly operated, or DO services, where the agency's primary urbanized area, or UZA, you might be more familiar with, is over 500,000 in population, and the agency's total directly operated vehicles operated in maximum service, or VOMs, is at least 100. So that's the kind of narrow case where we would require annual PMT sampling. But in all other cases, agencies can sample for PMT once every 3 years. In order to keep it simple, FTA has agencies on the same 3-year cycle. So 2026, fiscal year 2026, is a mandatory sampling year, which is why we're hosting this webinar now, since that is coming up soon for the majority of agencies reporting to the NTD. The next mandatory year after that is 2029, 2032, etc. If you do miss a mandatory year and sample the next year, you will still need to be on that same 3-year cycle as everyone else. So you would still be required to sample during the next mandatory sampling year, even if you were off cycle in the prior cycle. So today we're going to be focusing the latter half of this webinar on the NTD sampling method, and we're going to go into detail on that method, which is described in the NTD sampling manual that was linked earlier. But I want to mention some other options. So if you choose not to use the NTD sampling method, your agency is welcome to develop your own method for sampling. We call this the alternative sampling method. And our requirement to use another sampling method is that it must estimate PMT with a precision of plus or minus 10% at a 95% confidence level. And a statistician must certify that it meets those standards in order to report it as an alternative sampling method. The statistician can be anyone that your agency has determined is able to do that precision and confidence calculation. If you use APCs for PMT, typically your APC vendor will help you set up a method that meets our requirements. And for some of you who have already had your APCs certified, you may be familiar with this, but during your APC certification process, we will also help you determine which method you would report on your D10 form, which is what we're going to cover next, which is where we collect information on which methods you are using. All right, so here you can see the CEO certification D10 form. And some of you may be familiar with this if you complete it for your agency. But this form has multiple sections, but the two that we're going to review on this slide and the next are related to the collection methods for your unlinked passenger trips and your unlinked passenger trips and your passenger miles traveled data. So here we have the passenger mile data section. So there are several options listed for you to select which method you used for your PMT. And here you will fill this out based on all of your applicable modes. So you will select the option for data collection for each mode, and that will automatically populate a list of your modes at the bottom. If you if you're on a triennial sampling cycle and you used your last trip length that you collected during the last mandatory sampling year, and you're going to use that to calculate your PMT in the report year in question, you would select option C here, which is the collected and estimated using the trip length from the last mandatory year multiplied by your unlinked passenger trip number from this year. So if you select option C, if you are going to use that for the year in question, you then will also have to fill out the previous method, which is over to the right. And that is where you'll indicate what method you used during that last mandatory sampling year. So there are a couple of different options there, depending on your data collection for each mode. Then you'll complete the UPT section. So this will look similar. And here you will select the option from the list here, A through E, and you will do that for each mode that your agency operates. And I also wanted to point out on both the passenger mile data section and the unlinked passenger trip data section, you will see a column there with a checkbox for used APC data. So if you are using certified APC data to report to the NTD, you will want to select that checkbox for any applicable modes under the passenger miles data section and the Unlinked Passenger Trips data section. So if that applies to you and you have certified APCs, you can go ahead and select that. If you ever have questions about when to select that or when not to, you can chat with your NTD analyst. All right, so I am now going to pass it over to Matt to cover the NTD sampling method in depth. So we will take a pause here and Matt will start going over that.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. Let me get my screen sharing. Sampling is complex, and I won't have time to get into all of the details today. The detail that you need should all be in the NTD sampling manual, which is linked on the website. The NTD sampling method is a method that uses an Excel template to create a custom sampling plan for your agency. And that template is also linked on the website. If you have any other questions about sampling, you should contact your NTD analyst. And you can find their contact information in the NTD reporting system on either your reporter profile or the report package. It should look like the little screenshot that I have here. So in your first year using the NTD sampling method, the sampling manual provides a one-size-fits-all sampling plan, which you can customize in a few ways. This is called a ready-to-use plan. You should only use a ready-to-use plan if prior year sample data are not available, either because you haven't sampled before or because the prior year data are not reliable. The ready-to-use plan is designed to meet FTA's statistical requirements for almost any service, which means that in most cases, it's designed to oversample. The statistical principle here is that the more variability you have in your average passenger trip length, the bigger a sample you need to get a reliable estimate. Most agencies' trip lengths don't vary that much, so they can get away with a smaller sample, and the template plans are designed to take advantage of that. You should always use a template plan if prior year sample data are available and reliable. The template looks at the variability of that sample data and calculates the smallest sample size you can use while still meeting FTA's statistical requirements. So it's designed to save you time and money. One important piece of information that you need to develop your sampling plan correctly is whether you have 100% count of UPT available. If not, then you'll be estimating both UPT and PMT from your sample. The objective of your sample will be to obtain an average UPT per vehicle trip and PMT per vehicle trip. If you do have 100% count of UPT, then you'll only be estimating PMT from the sample, and you'll do that by obtaining an average PMT per UPT, which is equivalent to an average passenger trip length, or APTL. I mentioned that there are a few ways to customize your sampling plan. One of these is called route grouping. This is completely optional, but in some cases it can reduce your required sample size. But it also increases the complexity of the sampling and the math involved. Remember, I said that the more variability there is in your trip lengths, the bigger your sample has to be. The idea with route grouping is to split your service into different groups, each of which has a small variability in trip lengths. So even though your agency as a whole might have a wide range of trip lengths, each group has a small range. If you're using a ready-to-use plan, you can only use 2 groups. If you're using a template plan, you can use up to 10, although that many would be a bit overkill. The most typical case is to group all your express routes together and all your local routes together. This makes sense since the express routes will generally have longer trip lengths and local routes will have shorter trip lengths. You also might have distinct services operating in different areas, or you might have several different contractors. In that case, grouping might not actually decrease your sample size, but it still might be administratively convenient. Let's discuss ready-to-use plans. The manual has information on these on pages 4 through 6. It has tables for different modes. The table that I have here in the screenshot is for bus modes. There are other tables for demand response and van pool, for commuter rail, and for other rail modes. Make sure you use the table that's appropriate for your mode. Each of these tables tells you your required sample size, given your choices about a few different options. First, you choose a sampling frequency, which means how often do you want to select the next set of trips to sample. You can do it either once a quarter, or each month, or each week. This choice makes a small difference in your sample size, but really you should do what's most convenient for you. This might depend on how often you update your schedules or how big your system is. Selecting samples quarterly means you're selecting a ton of samples at once, but you don't have to do it as often. Next, you should decide whether you're sampling one-way trips or round trips. Round trips can be more convenient since the ride checker ends up back where they started, but a round trip doesn't give you as much information as two unrelated one-way trips, since the return trip wasn't chosen randomly. There's some correlation between the outbound and inbound trip. So if you do round trips, your sample size won't be just half the number of one-way trips, it'll be more than that. So most agencies choose to sample one-way trips. The next option is whether you have 100% count of UPT or not. If not, the manual calls that the base option. If you do, that's the APTL option. Finally, you choose whether to use route grouping or not. Once you've made all your choices, you can locate your row and column on this table, which will tell you your required sample size per sampling period and per year. For example, let's say I want to sample weekly. I'm sampling one-way trips. I have 100% count of UPT, and I'm not using route grouping. That will put me in column 2 in the last 2 rows. I need to sample 6 trips per week, which comes out to 312 per year. If you have sample data from a prior year, then you have to use a template plan instead of a ready-to-use plan. It is a little extra effort to use the template, but it should more than pay off in terms of fewer samples. I'm going to demonstrate how to use the template and hopefully demystify it a little bit. When you first open the file, it will probably give you several warnings. Where it says marked as final, click Edit Anyway. If it says automatic update of links has been disabled, you can just close that warning, which doesn't affect the functionality. And if it says some active content has been disabled, click Enable Content. The first tab gives you some information about the template. Let's go to the Input tab. This is where we'll input the data from our prior year sample. First, scroll down to row 52, and in cell M52, either leave that cell blank if you're not using route groups, or if you are using route groups, enter 1 if you can divide your UPT accurately by group, and 0 if you can't. In most cases, if you're using groups, you can do this. So in our example, I'll enter 1. Now I'm going to copy my sampling data, which I've compiled in another file, and paste it in this table starting in cell B71. I'll right-click on that cell and choose Paste Values to make sure I'm not pasting in formulas which might no longer work. Now I'll scroll up to row 33, where the file has automatically listed the names of my route groups based on the sample I pasted. I need to input the number of vehicle trips in each group during the prior year on row 34. On row 39, I enter the number of trips in each group for the upcoming year. In this example, I'll assume no schedule changes, so the numbers are the same. And that's all the input data. Now I'll go to the Sampling Plans tab to get my results. You can see it's given me several options here based on frequency, whether 100% count are available, and whether I want to use the PMT option, which is unusual. So for example, if I have 100% count of UPT and I want to sample monthly, I'll go to row 21, and it says I need to do either 6 samples per month, if I don't use grouping, or if I do use grouping, I would need 2 short routes, 4 medium routes, and 1 long route. So probably I would choose not to use grouping since it's actually the smaller sample. Notice that this sample is only 72 trips per year, whereas the equivalent ready-to-use sample would be 324 trips per year. So you can see significant savings when you use the sampling template. I'll note the Calculations tab. You don't need to look at it to use the template. It's basically the work going on under the hood. So that's it. With just a few minutes of work, I came up with the sample frequency required for the NTD sampling method. So now you know your sample size. The next step is to select your sample. You'll do this either weekly, monthly, or quarterly. First, make a list. Sorry, lost my place here. There we go. First, make a list of all the units of service that you'll operate in that week, month, or quarter. A unit of service is what you're going to sample, so either a one-way trip or a round trip. For demand response services, the unit is a vehicle day, meaning all the service that one vehicle provides in one day. I'm going to keep using the phrase vehicle trip on the understanding that that could mean a one-way trip, a round trip, or a vehicle day. Out of that list of all the vehicle trips in the period, you need to randomly select the number that your sampling plan requires. Randomly means that each vehicle trip should have an equal chance of being selected, and each trip can only be selected once. There are several different ways you can do this, but for your convenience, FTA created a random selector tool that you can use. You're welcome to use any other random selection method, but I'm going to demonstrate how to use the tool. Now I'll demonstrate using the random selector tool, which is a new tab in the sampling template. It's designed to make it easy to randomly select the trips to sample. You don't have to use this tool. Any method is fine as long as it gives every trip an equal chance of being selected, and each trip can only be selected once. First, I made a list of all the trips I'll operate in the coming month, since I chose to sample monthly. I assigned a unique ID to each one. I paste that list into the green area, starting with cell A2 by right-clicking and selecting Paste Values. Now in B3, I input my sample size for the month, which is 6, according to my sampling plan. I click Error, which will check my data for errors, making sure I don't have any repeated IDs and removing any blanks. You may receive a security warning like this one. If you do, click Enable Macros. I operate about 40,000 trips per month, so there's a lot of data, so this could take a few minutes to run. This data set took about 3 minutes to check on my computer. I'm going to use the magic of editing to skip ahead. Looks like the error checker didn't find any errors. So now I click the Select button. Again, this may take a few minutes. When it's done running, I have a list of 6 trips to sample for the month in column I in the purple area. I just have to do this every month to select the samples for the coming month. Once you have your sample selected, you need to arrange to collect data on those trips. The most common methods are ride checkers or video. A ride checker is a person you send on board the vehicle to record ons and offs at every stop. The manual has sample data collection sheets on pages 54 through 64. You're welcome to use these or to design your own. Many agencies use tablets so that there's no extra data entry step. Instead of sending someone in person, many agencies now have video footage of all trips, so you can pull the video of the trips you select. The advantage of this is that you can fast forward through the periods with no activity, and you can slow down or repeat to make sure you get the counts right. You also need to have a way of knowing which stop the vehicle is at. For each trip, you need to know the day. If you're using route grouping, you need to know which route it is. At the first stop, you record the number of passengers already on board. You would include those as boardings at the first stop. At each stop, record the number of boardings and the number of alightings. This tells you the number of passengers on board, or the passenger load. So if your load was 20, and at the next stop there were 2 ons and one off, your load is now 21. You also need to know the distance between each pair of consecutive stops. You can get this from the vehicle odometer, but it's usually easier and more accurate to get it from your records of information about the route. Now you can calculate the PMT and UPT for this trip. PMT is the passenger load times the distance. So on the first row, the load is 20, the distance is 0.3. 20 times 0.3 is 6.0. On the next row, 21 load times 0.7 distance is 14.7 PMT. Do this for every row, and then take the sum of the PMT from all the rows, and that's the PMT for the trip. The sum of boardings from all rows, including the passengers that were already on board, is the UPT for the trip. In this example, the PMT is 47.8, and the UPT is 24. You'll repeat those same calculations for each trip that you sample. At the end of the year, add together the total UPT and PMT from all your samples. You also need some subtotals. You need the total UPT and PMT from all weekday samples, from all Saturday samples, and from all Sunday samples. If you use route grouping, you need subtotals for each group from the entire year, as well as from each group in each day type. Remember that if you have 100% count of UPT, the purpose of your sample is to estimate APTL. So divide PMT by UPT for the total and each of these subtotals to get the APTLs that you need. If you don't have 100% count of UPT, you're looking for the average UPT and PMT per vehicle trip. So you need to divide PMT by the number of vehicle trips in the sample to get PMT per trip, and divide UPT by the number of trips in the sample to get UPT per trip. Do this for each subtotal, just like the APTL case. I'll walk through an example of these calculations in a moment. Once you have the ratios that you need, either APTL or UPT and PMT per vehicle trip, you expand them to the final answer by multiplying. If you're using the APTL method, multiply the APTL by total annual UPT to get total annual PMT. If you're using the base option, meaning you don't have total annual UPT, multiply PMT per trip times the total number of vehicle trips you operated for the year to get annual PMT. Multiply UPT per trip by that same number of total vehicle trips to get annual UPT. Then do the same thing for each subtotal. The weekday APTL from your sample times the total weekday UPT gives you the weekday PMT. Do the same thing for Saturday and Sunday. In the base option, take weekday PMT per trip times the total number of weekday vehicle trips to get total weekday PMT. Weekday UPT per trip times the total number of weekday vehicle trips gives you total weekday UPT. Do the same thing for Saturday and Sunday. If you use route grouping, there's an extra step. You would take the APTL from your sample for each group times the annual UPT from each group to get the annual PMT for each group. Then add the PMT for all groups together to get the total annual PMT. Do the same thing for each date type. In the base option, it works similarly. Calculate the UPT and PMT for each group separately, then add them together to get the total UPT and PMT. So that was all a bit abstract, so let's walk through an example. In this example, you have 100% count of UPT, so you're using the APTL option, and you are not using route groups. This table shows the data from your sample. The first is all the data together, and then you have columns for the weekday, Saturday, Sunday breakout. The first step is to calculate the APTL in each column by dividing PMT by UPT. Then, from your records where you get your complete count of UPT for the year, let's fill in the UPT. Finally, calculate the annual total PMT in each column by multiplying APTL times UPT. In this example, we have a little bit more work to do because we're estimating both UPT and PMT from the sample data. We start with the same data as in the last example. But we need an extra piece, the number of vehicle trips in the sample. We calculate UPT per trip by dividing the sample UPT by the number of trips in the sample. Calculate PMT per trip same way. And from your records, remember you don't have total UPT. What you have is the number of vehicle trips you operated. To estimate annual UPT, multiply UPT per trip by the number of vehicle trips. And PMT is estimated the same way. PMT per trip times the number of vehicle trips. And this example is the most complex because now we're using route grouping. We have group 1 and group 2. The data from the sample are broken out both by day type and by group. APTL is calculated the same way as before, as PMT divided by UPT. From your records, fill in the annual UPT. Annual PMT is estimated as APTL times annual UPT. Within each day type, add the annual UPT from group 1 plus group 2 to get the total UPT. And finally, add the annual PMT from the two groups together to get the total PMT. Remember that if you have 100% count of UPT and meet a few other criteria, you can sample once every 3 years. you will use the APTL from your sample to estimate PMT for the 2 years after your sample. Multiply the APTL from your complete sample by the total annual UPT from the current year, that is, the non-sampling year. That gives you the total annual PMT for the non-sampling year. Then calculate the PMT by date type. Multiply the weekday APTL from your sample by the weekday UPT from the non-sampling year. This is the weekday PMT. Do the same thing for Saturday and Sunday. If you use route grouping, compile the total annual UPT for each group from the non-sampling year. Multiply each of these by the sample APTL for the corresponding group. Add these PMTs together to get the total annual PMT. Note that using this method means your total annual APTL for the non-sampling year will be slightly different from the APTL from the sampling year because the proportion of UPT from each group will be slightly different. This is okay, but a validation check might fire because of it. If you explain that you use route grouping, your analyst will accept that explanation unless the difference is too large to be explained by the shifts in UPT. Once you've developed a sampling plan using the template, you can continue to use that plan through a few sampling cycles. But eventually, you may need to revise the plan because your service does change over time. FTA has developed a tool to test whether you need to revise your sampling plan. I'll demonstrate how to use that tool in a moment. If you sample every year, then FTA requires you to test whether revision is necessary every 6th year. If you sample every 3rd year, you need to test for revision every 9th year. If you make major changes to your service, then you should test for revision using data from the year that the change occurred. Let's walk through how to use the revision tool. The final feature of the sampling template is revision. First, I go to the Input tab. In the table starting in cell B71, I paste the data from my most recent sample. And in the table next to it, starting in cell J71, I paste the data that I originally used to develop the sampling plan I've been using, which would be from typically 9 years ago. So don't delete those old files. Just like when I first developed the plan, if I have 100 video there, let me try again here. So don't delete those old files. Just like when I first developed the plan, if I have 100% count of UPT, I enter 1 in cell M52. If I used route grouping, I would complete row 34 and 39, this time for both the original sampling data and the most recent sampling data. However, I chose not to use route grouping, so I'm leaving those blank. Now I go to the Revision tab. I enter 1 in cell I5 if I use route grouping. If I use the PMT method, I enter 1 in cell K5. If I've done this correctly, cell L5 should correctly describe my sampling options, which are the APTL method, I have 100% count of UPT, and I do not use route grouping. Now I look at cell B27, the yellow area, and it tells me whether I need to revise my sampling plan or not. In this case, it's telling me I do not, but if I did, I would go to the Sampling Plans tab and select one of the plans there. If not, I can continue using the same plan as before. And that's it. And that concludes our webinar. I'd need a whole series of webinars to cover everything, so I'm sure you do have questions. We can try to address some of your questions now, but I do encourage you to contact your analyst if you have really specific questions or if you have questions that we don't get to today. If you have issues with the NTD reporting website, you can contact the first email here, the IT help desk. If your analyst isn't available and you have reporting questions, you can contact the second email, the NTD help desk. And I think that puts us into the Q&A portion of the webinar.
Yes. Actually, there's no open questions currently.
Oh, wonderful.
I am seeing that the tables that are on 29, 30, and 31, I have the PowerPoint up on my other screen here. I'm trying to see. I think because the animations make the table, the second part of the table appear, and that's not reflected in the PDF because I don't know, the animation seems to happen really fast and I'm having trouble clicking. So I might be able to
We
take
can provide a
screenshots.
version that doesn't have that animation. That just has the
Okay.
final
I
answer.
was trying to grab a screenshot so that I could put it in the chat box, but it's not it's not working. And also I'm here doing this.
Yeah, this all really gives you an appreciation of how hard it is to make a movie, doesn't it?
Yeah, but I'd have other staff working for me ostensibly if I was filming a movie. Lots of moving pieces. Yes, so Joe in the chat just asked if the recording will be shared. And as soon as I have a chance to do some light editing and maybe try to boost the volume on the portions where the recording was, I'll see if I can do that. I should be able to. I'm going to post it on NTI's YouTube page. All of our webinar recordings are on there, so you can even go back and watch previous ones. Let me grab that link so you can all save that and look for it. So give me a little bit of time. I'm acting director currently, so I'm a little busy, and unfortunately, I'm still doing my job. So I will get to it as soon as I can. I've been pretty quick getting them posted, but give me a few days, please, I ask. Our YouTube page, I'm going to put the link.
Yeah, and I'll just hop in really quickly. I know there was some chatter about the recordings. So we can try to post the PowerPoint slide deck or find a way to post those videos. I know they'll be on YouTube, which should be easier to hear as well. But we'll also try to find if we can put a static version of the PowerPoint with the embedded videos on the NTD website. So I will look into doing that just so that it's a little easier to hear. And just want to say thanks again for bearing with us there. It's just, the best way to show it. But I know a lot of you will probably need to go back and kind of review Matt's overview of the templates and how that works. So I know how important that will be. So we will work on getting that on our website as well. But you'll definitely have the YouTube recording. And
Oh, sorry, Melissa. I think if you are able to post the PowerPoint itself, that would be helpful because it would show
Yeah.
They could rewatch the audio and the video, and I meant the video, and also see those charts that were animated.
Yes, awesome. And it looks like Chelsea
Oh, Chelsea.
Chelsea's putting in some pictures there too. Thank you so much,
Thank
Chelsea.
you. That's great. I was trying to do that while I was doing this, and it wasn't working so well, but thank
And I
you.
did see a question in the chat from Tilly about whether
Yeah.
this applies to reduced reporters who operate demand response. So the answer there is no. This only applies to full reporters in the urban module of NTD. So Tilly, this wouldn't apply to your agency at all. So you can disregard. Thank you for joining
Yeah, I
though.
mean there could be a few reduced reporters who need to sample for UPT. But for a demand response service, that would be very unlikely because everyone's scheduling trips ahead of time, so you should be able to get a complete count of UPT just from those trip records.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
There is a question in the Q&A box from Jessica. I'll read it since we're all here. What is the best way to work with our APC provider to figure out how to use their data? They have not provided any information to us on methods.
Yeah, that's a good question. Usually when you procure your APCs, the vendor will work with you on providing software that has reports that give you the data that you need. If you're not getting responses from them, I'm not really sure what I can tell you about that. But certainly if you contact your NTD analyst, we'll give you the best advice that we can, just with the caveat that, we're not APC technicians. We don't have visibility into your APC software. So I can't promise that we can solve that problem for you, but we'll certainly do what we can.
Are there any other questions? All right. Well, you're welcome. Thank you, Jessica. Everyone's saying thank you. So I guess unless another question pops in, we should wrap this up. I want to thank everyone for participating. Thank you for your patience with some of the little kinks that were happening. As I mentioned, this will be uploaded on our YouTube page. I did put the link in the chat. You might have to scroll up for that. You can also find it on our NTI website. I will, okay, I'm sorry. I'm trying to say too many things at once. There will be a survey evaluation sent out probably early, but if Melissa and Matt and Chelsea, if you want to send out the links for the whole PowerPoint and everything else we discussed, I have the list of the registrants from this session, so we can email everybody unless you have a mechanism for doing that. So other than that, please look for the evaluation. Please look for the other goodies you are owed. And I guess we will reconvene for the next NTD webinar, which I believe is August. So have a good summer. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you all have a great afternoon.